you all downloaded the materials that Paul had uploaded. In this case, the model I want you to open up now is Interface Tutorial Start. It's a simple carrying capacity model. Model's totally boring. But what we're going to do here is introduce you to the structure of the interface portion of Stella Architect. We're not actually going to build a real interface on this, but we're just going to kind of learn about what all the tools are, what they do, how you use them together, so that we have kind of the understanding of all of the techniques in our toolbox, so that for the rest of the week we can actually build this pretty in-depth, pretty neat simulation all about the console wars, you know, Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. Alright. So what we're in here right now is Architect. You're looking at the model window. The model window shows you the stock and flow structure. You can click on any of the elements. You can see the equations. You have your panel here on the right. Left and right. Okay. You have your tools all the way up at the top and a run toolbar at the bottom. So I imagine most of you guys at this point have built models using Architect and are pretty familiar with putting together a couple of stocks, a couple of flows, getting some behavior. You probably haven't yet hit this button over here, this Open Interface Window button, or if you have, you've seen it and it's looked fairly similar to what you're used to seeing, but allows you to do something totally different. So the way that Stella, that we've put together Stella Architect, is we have different processes being done in different places. So your stock and flow modeling is done in your model window. Your presentation of results and your learning environments are created in the interface window. And you know, kind of the assumption that I made when I came up with this was that most people who are doing, you know, serious work, you know, and they're really getting stuff done, typically have two monitors, or at least have a multi-desktop ability where they can, you know, have one window open somewhere and another window open somewhere else. So these two windows are actually hooked together. So whatever I do in the model window in the background will show up here in the interface window in the foreground. Whatever I do in the interface window in the foreground will immediately change stuff going on in the model window in the background. This is really, really, really important. Because when I'm running a model from the interface and I see results I don't understand, oh my god, why is profit in the floor? I can immediately stop running, go look at my stock and flow structure, and it has that run currently loaded up in exactly the same spot you were in the interface, with all of the changes that you've made to the model in the interface all set up ready to go. So you can debug your logic, you can figure it out. Alright, so here's the interface window. Down the left, we have a list of all of our pages. They're kind of like, you know, slides in PowerPoint. In the middle here, we have our canvas. This is where we put stuff down. This is where we do the what you see is what you get. On the right is all of our settings. And you'll notice that there are settings for stuff when I have nothing selected, which is different than the settings I have for stuff when something is selected. So I just put down a button here. A button is the first tool all the way on the left. How well can you see this? Is the stuff really small? Like, especially for you guys in the back?
Maybe a stronger contrast. Or less brightness, something.
That's probably a bunch bigger.
It's better from here.
Okay. Well, you're almost the furthest in the back, so if you can see it, I'm assuming everybody else can see it. Okay. So here we've got, you know, our button. This is what we call our build toolbar. This is what I call the mode toolbar. So what's kind of neat is you can actually take this stuff off and reorganize it. So if you've got a way you want things to look, you can do that. And it will remember. But anyway, I'm just going to put it all back here to the default. So we've got a whole list of tools up along the top. Here's our button. When we click on our button, it gives us a panel which lets us control things about the button. For pretty much all the widgets that you're going to interact with on the interface layer, there are two tabs in the settings panel. there are the things settings. So wrench means settings. And you have the paint roller. Paint roller means styles. Styles are typically how things look and feel. Settings are what's in it and what does it do. So for a button, we've got options, which lets us enter in a label, an icon, where the icon goes relative to the label, and then this list of actions. So we use buttons in simulations to perform actions. And what's an action? Well, an action is, the ability to run the sim, or pause the sim, or resume the sim, or stop the sim. So these are all things that are done on a timer according to the sim speed that you have set up. So if you remember, in your model settings, you have this option called sim speed. It can be either really, really slow, like, oh my God, why is this taking so long? Or it can be really, really fast, which is it runs what's called ballistically. So when you have the sim speed slider pushed all the way to the end, it runs the model in what we call internally ballistic mode, like a bullet. It runs it as quick as it possibly can. Don't animate anything. Just give me the goddamn results. So oftentimes, most people have it set to somewhere around here because this looks really pretty. And you get simulation results, and it runs over time. Okay, so back to our button here. So here are our button actions. These do the stuff down here in the run toolbar. They do our run, our pause, our stop, our resume. We then have options. We can have buttons put interfaces in Stella Live mode. Have you guys had experience with Stella Live? With Synthesim? Because I know you use the word Synthesim. Yeah. Okay. So we call that Stella Live. So let me show you what that looks like. So if we go back to our model window and we click on the magnifying glass to go into Explore mode, we're looking at results of our model. I can spin a knob here. And as I spin the knob, you can see the behavior is automatically changing. You can see it especially in the population stock. If I were to, for instance, go to Window, actually, I'll just right-click, View Results. You can see here that as I spin this knob, it's automatically resimulating on the fly. Okay. So that's what Stella Live is. So on a button, you can have a button put your interface into what's known as Stella Live mode. So whenever a user changes a parameter in your interface, the model will automatically resimulate and data show up in the graphs without them having to do anything. You then have the ability to simulate in ballistic mode, advanced time in ballistic mode, and new run. So like I was telling you before, ballistic mode is give me the results right now. I don't want to wait. I don't want to animate. I don't want it to be pretty. Just give them to me. So this lets you advance time in discrete chunks without necessarily animating. We then have the restore options, and these are kind of funnily named. You have restore all devices. Well, what's a device? A device is a graph, a table, a slider, a knob. So think of device as the super category, and you have subcategories, inputs and outputs. So inputs are your knobs, your sliders, your numeric inputs, your group input devices, your graphical input controls, all things which set parameters in your model. Restore all outputs, your tables, your graphs, your numeric displays, your things which show you data from the model. So what does it mean to restore it? To restore it means clear it out, empty it, delete it. So this will delete all of the changed parameters in your model. So let's say we have a constant like we do in this model. So let's put down a slider together. We grab the slider from the build toolbar up here, we put it down. And every time when you're asked to input a variable, you can either type it in, which is really annoying because I have no idea what's in this model, and it will give you an autocomplete, or you hit the green plus, and the green plus is almost always the better case because it shows you this really neat pick list which lets you figure out what the heck is in the model and what it is. So in this case we want to control the birth rate, and so you'll hear me use that word control. When I put down a slider, I am controlling a variable. When I put down a knob, I am controlling a variable. What that means is I'm going to ignore the value that's in the equation, and it's just going to be whatever the heck the input device says it's going to be. In this case, the birth rate is going to be 0.05. It's not going to be whatever is in the equation box. In this case, in the equation box is 0.05, but it doesn't, it's controlled. It's no longer based on the equation. So you can actually do some pretty neat stuff where you can break feedback loops. You can put sliders on stuff that has equations. So you want to see what happens when a feedback loop is broken, put a slider on a variable within that feedback loop, set it, and now that feedback loop is busted. It will have no effect on the model. That variable that will always be whatever you make the slider. I'll show you that. Anyway though, so whenever we have a ranged input device being something that shows you a minimum, a maximum, and then the knob being the value, you have to enter the range. Yes, you don't have to, like I don't hold a gun to your head and say put in a range, otherwise it's not going to work. Because I show you blank here, but if you don't enter a range, the values at the end of the slider will change based on the value in the equation, and it's weird, and you'll never get the results you really want. So in this case, we want the birth rate to go from 0% to 25%, and then we can enter in an increment. 99% of the time, I really urge you to enter in an increment. An increment means in what steps is this thing set. So you can set it in steps of 1% versus steps of 0.1% or steps of 10%. This allows you to control the precision of the inputs into your model. If you don't set up an increment like that and somebody drags a slider, they're going to get 0.01, 2, 3, 7, 6, 5, 4, 2, it's stupid. Nobody wants that level of precision. So set your increments. We then have reset after and reset to value. These are more advanced features. And what they do essentially is whenever you change something using a slider or using a knob or using a numeric input, let me show you this. Don't follow me here. I'm just going to put these things down and delete them. So this is a numeric input device. You just type into it. This is a knob. You drag the value through the range. So these are our inputs for entering in single values. Whenever you have a device like that, you can have it reset its value after a certain amount of time. If you have reset after being never, if the user makes the birth rate 12.5%, the birth rate will be 12.5% till the end of the universe. The only time it will then change is unless they move the knob again, they restore all inputs. Those are the only two ways you could ever unset that. So whenever a decision is made on the interface, it is set that way. It's in the model. It's saved with the model. So if I save the model with the birth rate at 12.5%, when I open the model again, the birth rate is going to be at 12.5%. Even if I don't open up the interface. So you have the option to reset these controlled values after every time step, after every time unit, or at the end of the simulation. So you can say, okay, after I've finished running this run, I don't want the birth rate to be 12.5% anymore. Go back to the default value in the equation. So in this case, reset refers to going back to whatever value you type into that box. We then have a whole bunch of different layout options. So by default, we leave things blank. So blank means whatever the heck the default is. The default will use the variable name, but oftentimes your variable names are ugly. So we want to give it the right capitalization. We type it in, and the label changes for us. Word wrapping for the title, where we want the title to be. In this case, I'm going to put it on the left. And how many labels we want on the slider. And then we have this, what's this slider width thing? This allows us to control how long the slider is. So something that's really important when you're developing your interfaces is getting stuff lined up on a grid. If stuff doesn't match together on a grid, stuff looks bad. And if your interface looks bad, people aren't going to take you as seriously. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. So let's put down a second slider, and I'll show you why we do things like set a slider width. Okay, so now we're going to add in a new slider. Actually, no, let's not do a slider. Let's do a different device. Let's do a numeric input device. In this device, we're going to do reference lifetime. So here's an example of I spun the knob on the model layer, and you know, I didn't set an increment, and that's what I set the reference lifetime to. It's a ridiculous number. It's absurd. Okay, so when we set things up the way that we do with this, you know, slider expands to fit or a specific slider width, it's so that we can get things lined up on a grid. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the positions of this variable, of this slider, and it's, you know, at X position 55, Y position 35. These are pixels. So this is 55 pixels to the left of the edge of the screen, and 35 and a half from the top of the screen. It's a width of 460 pixels and a height of 71. So what I can do is I can select many things at once, and it gives me this multi-selection panel. The way I did that was I selected the first thing, I hit the Shift key, and I clicked on the next. I can also do it by just dragging over and selecting both. So to get things to be the same size, I can say I want both of these to be 450 pixels wide, and I want them both to be 50 pixels tall, and I want them both to have the same exact X coordinate. So let's make them both be 50 off. And so what that's done is that's made them all line up perfectly. The labels match. The input devices will match in a second. So we can take this, come back in here, we set the input width, and now they are the same width. Whereas if we had input expands to fit, you know, we get stuff where it looks hokey based on the label. So if, you know, if we were to not wrap this title, you know, why is the slider that much longer than the box, and it doesn't look as pleasant. Okay. So let's go back to our button now. So the key components of any interface that we develop are inputs, outputs, and actions. Actions meaning doing stuff. So right now we've got our inputs covered, but we haven't covered our outputs yet. So in this case, let's use a graph. And this tool should be really familiar to you. It's the same exact graph that's on the model layer. Let's plot a variable. Let's plot population. I personally like all of my graphs to have 0 always be visible, so I always check that off. In certain cases, it can be nice, I guess, to not do that when you really want to show the shape of the change, but I almost always find that to be misleading. Okay, so now we have our inputs, we have our output, we need our actions. So we go back to our button, and I select the action run, and you'll see now that the button title automatically updated for me because I didn't enter in a title specifically at the top, but I could say this is the Billy button, and now that will always say Billy. I could change this action to be stop, and it will say Billy. But I'm going to go back to run. If I leave it blank, it will go to run. If I go to stop, it now says stop. If I go to pause, it says pause. So as much as possible, I try not to enter in labels. The labels that we give you by default are pretty good. And there we go. All right. So now, as you can see, we've got a graph, we've got our inputs, we have a button, we've got an interface. A really ugly, terrible one, but we got it. So now we can go in and we can present. So there are 3 modes here. next to edit mode. So you should remember, from the model layer, you have edit and explore. Here you have edit and either explore, present window, or present full screen. So when I present it full screen, it does it kind of like PowerPoint. Hides everything else out of the way, shows you your interface. I can run. And so the whole point of everything that you're doing here on the interface layer is to prep stuff for publishing to the web. That's the way that all of this was designed. So what you're looking at here in presentation mode is exactly the way it will appear on the web, as if I had published it. And that's really important to keep in mind. Present windowed is kind of the same thing as regular presentation mode, but I can keep it in a window so I can look at other things. And then we have explore mode. Explore mode is kind of weird. I've been kind of fence sitting on what the heck to do with it. Because explore mode allows you to quickly and easily test your model from your interface. So if you remember what I was telling you before, that your model window and your interface windows are tied together. So I'm just going to kind of split screen here. So I'm in explore mode right now. And you'll see that I'm in explore mode in both the model window and the interface window. Now I'm in edit mode in both. I'm just going to hide the panel here. Okay, and so when I move this slider now, as you can see, the birth rate is changing on the model layer, the population is adjusting on the model layer, and the population is also adjusting on the interface. So that's proof the two windows are tied together. Explore mode puts the model into Stella Live mode automatically and lets you just test things out real quick without having a context switch. So sometimes when you're developing stuff, it gets annoying to present, play, look. Present, play, look. Here you just hit explore and you have stuff and you can immediately play with it. When you're on the interface, you can still use the run toolbar down here. So it's not absolutely required for me to have this run button. I can just run the model from here. But if I were to publish this interface, there's now no way for my users who are using this model on the internet to actually run the model. Okay. You'll notice there that undo redo now works, as opposed to those of you, poor people, who had to use V10. Anyway. So now we've built, the most basic interface. It's got sliders, it's got graphs, it's got input devices. So let me talk to you now about the rest of the widgets that we have up here. We've got buttons. We have annotation button. Billy, what's an annotation button? This is an annotation button. Okay, annotation buttons are kind of weird. How many of you have seen stories before? Okay. Have you seen a story that David has made?
We haven't gotten to that yet. He's going to rely on you and then he will tell stories.
Okay, so he hasn't shown you one yet.
No, he hasn't been here.
Yeah, really, but there are two kinds of students. There are second-year students who have seen about stories, and there are first-year students who haven't seen them.
Okay, got it. Okay, so an annotation is something that allows us to decorate our interface to add a bit more information. So we can use an annotation to say, change the birth rate to see the effect on population. And to edit, you just double click and it turns into a text editor. You can also do it right here in the panel as well. So you'll notice you can hide the panel by using that button over here to get it out of the way or bring it back. So you put an annotation next to the thing that you want to annotate. And when you present, it shows up there. And then when you click, it goes away. So it's just a way of kind of putting a tooltip or putting a description of what the item is next to it. Now, the reason why it's called a button is because in the option for it, can actually show a button. So you see what's this weird dotted thing here? That is the invisible button right now that is tied to whether or not this annotation is visible. So we can turn this button on, and so oftentimes people will do the following, where we can then come in here and present, and they'll have a question mark button, and they'll say, oh, when you hit the question mark, the annotation comes up. So it's not always sitting there on top of things in the way. So that's what an annotation is for. So you'll notice those two widgets are linked together. That button and that pop-up are the same thing. They're two parts of the same whole. We have text boxes, which we use, for labels. When we go to a text box, we can control its border. So oftentimes people will use text boxes just for their border, just to get a rectangle. You can enter it as plain text or rich text. You can set up padding and scrolling and all the font settings, and you can style yourself to death on the text box. We then have the graphics frame or graphics, which is just a picture. So you can take that, put it down. These are called annotations. So you'll notice there's a set of divisions up here. All the stuff on the left are your annotations. They annotate your interface. They're not input devices or output devices. The next set of devices between the dividers are our output devices. Graphs, tables, numeric displays, and status indicators. I'll show you all of them. And then your other devices are your slider, your input devices, your slider, your knob, your numeric input, your switch, your options, your group input device, and your graphical input device. Importing pictures is easy. You can do it from a file, or you can do it from a file or the clipboard. Okay, I think that has some pictures in it. So there we go. We've got a picture. Now, there's this option to embed files within your model. So those of you who have worked with images, at least in the model layer, know that if you don't embed it within the model, when you email your model to somebody, they're not going to have the picture. Embedding actually takes the photo, encodes it as a string, as a word, essentially, and puts it in the file. Embedding files within the model file makes your model huge, and typically makes it pretty slow, at least on the interface layer. So on the interface, try not to embed unless it's under like 100 kilobytes. So let me show you how models are set up so that when you send models to somebody, they get the pictures. So I'm just going to come here to my Finder. Okay, okay, so here's the model that we're going to work with tomorrow, and you'll notice that there's this graphics folder next to it, and it's specifically spelled graphics with an uppercase G. And next to the model is where it lives, and inside of it are all of the images. As long as you do that, and you load your images from there, what I can do is I can take this and zip them together. I can now email that zip to somebody, and when they